take a look this week and next week and possibly the following week at some things that I've reflected on in this first 9 verses for several years, things that have really spoken to me out of a passage of Scripture that I think maybe we just take 1 or 2 things for granted and we miss so much else in here. So John chapter 5, verses 1 through 9. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porches. In these lay a great multitude of sick people, blind, lame, paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water. Then whoever stepped in first after stirring up the water was made well of whatever disease he had. Now a certain man was there who had an infirmity 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he already had been in that condition a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. But while I am coming, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Rise, take up your bed and walk." And immediately the man was made well, took up his bed and walked, and the day was the Sabbath. You know, this may be one of the most revealing passages in the New Testament with regard to our failure to launch with respect to, you know, the tangible experience of this grace of God that we say that we believe in. You know, as long as the grace of God is kind of an out there thing, you know, everybody can pretty much, think about it positively. But when it comes to the tangible experience of the grace of God, it seems that we have, oftentimes a failure to connect. And yet I don't believe that's what God had in mind. I don't believe that Jesus coming and revealing Abba's character, his personality, his will, and his desires regarding humanity was something that was intended to leave us coming up short of connection with that grace. And so as I, today what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin to today in particular, I'm going to challenge you a little bit, challenge me. I'm going to stir some things up a little bit. If you feel like you've been bitten a little bit, please don't. I'll try to kiss it and make it better a little bit later on, if not this week, next week. But I want to challenge all of us because there's a whole lot more here in John 5, 1-9 than I think that we've acknowledged or realized before. Now, 3 things in particular that have spoken to me out of this passage that we're going to look at today, and there's some others next week, but 3 things in particular just really jumped out at me and spoke to me and at this event at Bethesda. If you go with me, first of all, to verse 5, notice that it said, "Now a certain man who was there had an infirmity 38 years. This is the first thing that jumped out at me. Infirmity 38 years. Now, obviously, in this particular passage, there is the, I guess obviously, we should say there's a physical issue that's involved here. There's a physical issue. It's assumed to be paralysis. That's the way we've translated it, okay? But here's the thing I want you to get a hold of, first of all, as we get into this. Physical disease is not the definition of infirmity. We've talked about this from time to time around here before. What I want you to understand is that physical disease is not the definition of infirmity. In other words, if you look up infirmity, you would not find that it said strictly physical disease. Now, certainly a physical disease can fall under that category or that heading. But we do need to understand that this is not the definition. And in fact, I don't believe, and I think you'll see this as we go on, I don't believe the physical disease was the real focus of Jesus' words and attention given to this man, okay? Let's first of all, let me give you and most of you are probably familiar with this, the definition of infirmity. The word infirmity means the inability to produce results. You've heard me say that many times, I'm sure, the inability to produce results. There's a passage of Scripture that many of us charismatics are familiar with over in Romans chapter 8. For instance, it says, "The Spirit himself helpeth our infirmity, for we know not what to pray for as we ought." So there he's referring to infirmity as the inability to produce results with regard to our prayer life, right? So that's what I want you to see, that while physical disease certainly can fall under the heading of infirmity, it's not the definition of infirmity. And I don't believe, and I think you're going to see this to be true, that it was the real focus of what Jesus was speaking to this man, with regard to this man. We'll see that as we go along. Now, this message, okay, so we have a man 38 years unable to produce the desired result, right? 38 years unable to produce the desired result. Now, this message is no good unless it speaks to you. All right? So I need to ask you, first of all, does this definition speak to you in any way? In other words, have you discovered yourself to be in any way unable to produce consistently results in some specific area? Well, duh, right? Okay, I want to make sure we get that, right? Okay, so, but do you find yourself then, let me put it this way, infirm? Have you discovered yourself to be infirm in any way? Now, if not physical disability, right, because a lot of us could say, no, I've been strong and healthy all my life. Well, if not physical disability, though, how about things like fear, shame, condemnation, anger, bitterness, depression, insecurity, rejection? Have you found yourself lying, bedridden at poolside in rejection, fear, anxiety, condemnation, so on and so forth? Have you found yourself unable to produce the desired result, which is to what? Get beyond that, get out of that, right? Okay, so as I said, this message is no good unless it speaks to you and me, right? Now, you may not have considered, and particularly in reading this, you may not have considered these emotional maladies, or I'm going to call them maladies of the soul. But the truth of the matter is, that these are generally the real infirmities that keep us bedridden at poolside. And we're going to see that as we go on. Now, somewhere in that list, and of course the list could be much bigger, but somewhere in that list you may have recognized the catalyst of some natural expression of infirmity in your life, right? And so we're going to try to help you resolve that issue, okay? And Jesus is just asking you, do you want to be made well? Or the King James, I like that a little bit better because it says, would you be made whole? And wholeness, wellness is a big word too. It's a bigger word than we give it credit for being. Wholeness, I think, though, says it better because, there's a passage of Scripture that most of us are familiar with. I believe it's 1 Thessalonians 5:23. May the God of peace sanctify you wholly, right? And may you be, let me read it to you real quick. You don't need to turn over there. Just let me read it quickly because it's been so long since I've used it. Now, may the God of peace himself sanctify you, this version says completely or wholly, and may your whole spirit, soul, and body be preserved blameless at the coming of the Lord Jesus. May your whole spirit and soul and body. So wholeness or wellness should say something more to us than just relief from physical disability. All right? So just keep that in mind as we go. So Jesus is asking us, would you be made whole? Do you want to be made well? Now, as I said, these maladies of soul, really, I think we'll see, and I think maybe we already understand, are really what oftentimes is the real infirmity that keeps us bedridden at poolside. Now, we're not going to go on some ridiculous witch hunt, as was common with, and maybe still is, with inner healing ministries and generational curse ministries and all of that stuff. That's all irrelevant. All we really want to do is begin to, increase our understanding, broaden our awareness of the scope of the Lord's question to this man. Okay? We want to realize how, for one thing, I want to begin to realize how emotional issues often resist our experience of the finished work of Christ in our lives. We talk about the finished work of Christ, and we get specific about the finished work of Christ with regard to, for instance, physical healing and stuff like that. And when we don't experience the finished work, we sometimes get very cynical about healing and things like that. And so what I want to do really right away is just broaden our awareness of the Lord's words to this man and help us to realize, as I said, that certain emotional issues are oftentimes the real resistance to our experience of grace, right? Now, I want you to listen carefully. All of these things that I mentioned, you'll have to be careful how you hear this now, especially if you've come out of word of faith and a lot of condemning statements that are made. But all of these emotional things that I just mentioned and so many more are really forms of unbelief. And if you've been around here long enough, you know what unbelief is. It's the belief in right? It's the belief in Now, I got this originally years ago, this revelation from Arthur Mencius, and I've enjoyed it because it really shined a special light on some things for me. Unacceptable, unworthy, unusable, unlovable, unhealable. See, all of these things that I've talked about, rejection, depression, anger, a lot of these things, they're all expressions of unbelief, of belief in some in your life, right? And I really think that that's the best description of the word unbelief in the Bible. I think that's what the New Testament is trying to communicate to us, that humanity has had a belief in being unexcusable, right, with regard to God and regard to so on and so forth, right? So anyway, and we're all familiar with, and we've been accused, I know, as charismatics, of using it out of context. 3 John 2, beloved, I pray that you may prosper and be in health according as your soul prospers. See, there's a connection here between the prosperity, and I'm not just talking about dollars and cents now, I'm just talking about the abundant life, our health, our wholeness, and the prosperity of the soul. These soul maladies, these soul weaknesses that I'm referring to right now, these are the things that are keeping us from enjoying the abundant life so many times, right? And we're familiar with scriptures like, as a man thinketh, so is he. And I know, again, sometimes I do agree. We've used those passages out of context. But the greater body of evidence in the scripture is that there is so much that goes on within the inner man that affects the outer man. The outer man is a reflection of the inner man in so many ways. So we've got to understand this. And I really think this is what Jesus, I think you'll see this is what Jesus is revealing to this man at the pool of Bethesda. That there is an inner something that is being reflected in his outer circumstance, continuing to be reflected, I should say, okay? All right, so now hear me well. Physical disease has its beginnings in the unseen realm of the soul. Let that sink in for just a minute. Physical disease has its beginnings, in the unseen realm of the soul, in that area of our persuasions, our expectations, that type of thing. And now, many of us are persuaded by the life that has gone before us, referring to that which has been the familial persuasion of grandma and grandpa and mom and dad, and so now we have it too. So when I say that physical disease, has its origins or its beginnings in the unseen realm of the soul, I'm not saying that it's something that you just came up with. It could be something that has been, more or less sown into you somewhere along life, a rejection and abuse or so on and something like that. But what I want you to get a hold of, first of all, is that physical disease does not stand alone out here as its own invasive entity. Just, hovering around and all of a sudden, a formerly perfectly whole individual is now smitten with physical disease. Something has gone before that to prepare the way. Again, we're not on a witch hunt. We don't care what's gone before it. We really don't care, and I'll say that again in a minute, but I want you to get this. But you see, in so many ways, the ministry of Jesus was about teaching humanity to think differently. Isn't that right? Changing the way men thought. And of course, we talk a lot about here about how it was about teaching, or about retraining men's thoughts about Abba, about his relationship, his caring, loving relationship for every individual human that had ever or would ever live upon the face of this earth. We know what a devastated state Israel was in terms of their understanding of the nature of God. We know it because the church today lives in that same broken down understanding of God, don't they? And so that's why we talk about it so much around here. That's why so many people are rising up nowadays and talking about the goodness of God as opposed to, the vengeance and the unforgiveness and all that things of God, But anyway, but as I said, so, Jesus was all about changing the way men thought about Abba, and of course then about themselves and their relationship to Abba. He was about revealing that Abba loved you, cared about you, wanted everything about you to be whole and healthy and well, everything about you, spirit and soul and body, preserved, complete, blameless, faultless. Well, that means without crack. Faultless. A fault is a crack. Without any crack. In the perfection of spirit and soul and body at the coming of the Lord, right? Jesus was all about revealing Abba to be a caring, loving Father. The Abba that Jesus revealed was a full-service Papa. And see, we've made him a partial service Papa. We need to think about these things as we go, all right? Now, here's a vital truth, something that you need to embrace and meditate on. Physical disease is not biological in origin. Wow, what did he say? Physical disease is not, it's biological in manifestation, but it's not biological in origin. The origin of physical disease is, I am afraid because I'm naked, and I feel myself separated from my Creator. Same thing we've been talking about in the last series. This is the origin of physical disease. I'm alone. I'm naked. I don't have the covering of the glory of God. I'm afraid. Think about these things. I'm afraid. And myself is hidden or separated from my Creator, right? Go with me over to Jeremiah chapter 8. We're going to come back to John 5 in just a moment, but go with me over to Jeremiah chapter 8. I think of all of the prophets in the Old Testament, and this is probably peculiar to me, I have the most respect and the most interest in the man Jeremiah and in his message. I just have a sense that he maybe knew God in a way that the other people didn't know God. I just have always really enjoyed this book. I remember years ago when I began to preach out of it at my first church, people thought he's going to preach out of the Old Testament. And then I spent several weeks just preaching the gospel out of Jeremiah. I know we normally think of Isaiah being the gospel of the Old Testament, but Jeremiah had so much insight, and so much that's recorded here is so valuable. Look at Jeremiah 8:11. For they have healed the hurt of the daughter of my people slightly, or the margin in my Bible says superficially. They have healed the hurt of the daughter of my people slightly, saying, peace, peace, when there is no peace. Physical healing is always good. Every one of us would agree with that. It's always good to have physical healing, but we need to realize that it is only superficial unless peace is restored to the underlying issue. And that's exactly what Jeremiah is saying. He's saying they've healed the hurt of the daughter of my people, but only superficially. They're saying peace, peace, when there is no peace, and when apart from peace, there is no healing. Right? That's what he's going on to say here, And Marilyn and I talk about this a lot, but when I listen to people, and particularly in the last recent couple of years, when I read the expressions, particularly like on Facebook, of many of the people who have become cynical about healing, what I hear in their expressions is an awful lot of turmoil of soul. Think about that. When you read, and I've known and I've communicated face to face with and read the writings of some of the highly respected, most intelligent theologians that we're familiar with today, and they're very cynical about healing. Yep. They're people who I would love to have the knowledge and the understanding of some of these theologians, the historical understanding, the understanding of the Hebrew and the Greek and the linguistic values and so on. I mean, and yet I listen to these people talk, or I read their writings, I realize the cynicism that is in them with regard to healing, and the first thing I recognize is the turmoil of soul that produces that. Now listen, as I said to you last week, none of us are getting out of here alive. I have never tried to communicate a message that says man's going to live forever. There are people who want to take it that way, and when I finally said to people a couple of years back, I lost a lot of friends. A lot of people who had been really following our teachings on healing and restoration and recovery and stuff like that suddenly left when I broke the sad news to them that they're not going to live forever in this flesh. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about living this life to its fullest, living this life in such a full and complete and confident way with Abba that when we move into the next dimension, it's expected, welcomed, that we're excited about it. I was telling my grandson last night at his birthday party, we were talking about death and people being afraid of death. I mean, just a short conversation. But I said, he said, who isn't afraid to die? I said, me. Grandy said, me. And I told him, I said, there's a difference in not being afraid to die. I mean, being afraid to die and just not wanting to die yet. I said, well, I didn't want to die when my children were young. Even then, I wasn't afraid to die, but I certainly didn't want to die, and I was going to resist it with all of my being. They didn't want to leave Marilyn alone with the kids. That would have been the ultimate. To get even, though, wouldn't it? Leave her alone with all 6 kids. But anyway, no, I mean, and now today, I'm enjoying to no end my life now with my grandchildren and the opportunity. I mean, see what I'm saying? But I'm not afraid to die. And there's a difference. And I'm going to welcome it when it comes. You see, if I can communicate back to you, I'll tell you how much I enjoyed getting there. But so when we're talking about being able to have, a wholeness, a wellness with which you live your life. And certainly it includes physical healing and physical recovery and restoration and so on and so forth. But if we're going to have that, we need to realize that it's only superficial unless peace is restored to the underlying issues. You hear what I'm saying? Okay. I think it's interesting that in Isaiah 53:5, when most of us are familiar with that one, that it says the chastisement for our peace, my voice is changing too, our peace was upon him, and then it says by his stripes we are healed. I think there's a chronological truth being communicated there. The chastisement for our peace precedes, see, by his stripes we are healed. And see, Jesus was offering this man something far more, in John chapter 5, something far more than just the physical healing, although he was offering him that. He was offering him a wholeness. Made well is not a good, in modern day vernacular, made well is not a good translation or interpretation, however you want to say it there, because it says so much less to us today than it would have meant even if they had used those exact words when Jesus said it. Because wellness would have meant something much bigger than what we think of as well right now. We're so conflicted in these things, right? another place where I see a chronological truth being presented. I know it was originally from Isaiah, but when Jesus talks in Luke 4:18, he says that I have been anointed to heal the brokenhearted, before he says, and to preach recovery of sight to the blind. See, I see that there's a resolution of the maladies of the soul that is necessary in order for the sequential healing to really be more than superficial. You know what I'm saying? Okay. All right, let's move on. We're in Jeremiah 28, Jeremiah 8. Go down to verse 21 now. For the hurt of the daughter of my people, I am hurt. Now, first of all, he said they have healed the hurt of the daughter of my people only slightly or superficially or temporarily, we might say too, right? Saying peace, peace when there is no peace. And now continuing on, referring to the daughter of his people, he says in verse 21, for the hurt of the daughter of my people, I am hurt. This is something we need to understand. This expresses the Father's heart. For the hurt of the daughter of my people, I am hurt. I am mourning. Astonishment has taken hold of me. See, this is the Abba that Jesus revealed. This is the Abba that Jesus was presenting to humanity. A father who is hurt by our hurts. Okay? He says, astonishment has taken hold of me. Now look at verse 22. Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? Why then is there no recovery for the health of the daughter of my people? Now listen to these first two lines of that verse. Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? What's the obvious answer? Certainly there is. Isn't that the question he's asking? Isn't he trying to direct our attention back to the fact that there is balm in Gilead, that there is a physician there, right? And then he says, well, why then? So the understood answer is, there is, so why then? See? There is a doctor in the house, so why then is nobody being treated? That's what he's saying. There is a balm, there is a healing balm in Gilead, right? There is a physician there. So why then is nobody taking advantage of the free clinic? Why then is nobody allowing me among the daughter of my people? Why is no one then allowing me to demonstrate my compassion, my desire for everybody's well-being and wholeness, right? All right. So he says, why then is there no recovery? Well, maybe there's a little bit of something revealed to us, I believe, here in the word Gilead. The word Gilead, he said, is there no balm in Gilead? The word Gilead is a word that means heap of testimony. You know, the altars of stone that they heaped up all the time? And what were those altars of stone all about? They were places of remembrances of his faithfulness, weren't they? They were places where when they would run across them, come across them in their travels or even in their day-to-day, back and forth to wherever they were going, they would run into a heap there and they would understand what that heap was there for. Our father Abraham built this, or Moses built this, or Joshua built this, or whatever, and this is what it was built for, to remind us of, reminders, heap of testimony, right? But in modern vernacular, we wouldn't say heap of testimony, we would say body of evidence. Because that's what that was. That represented. That was an evidential display, see, of the faithfulness of God. You get that? Okay. So we can maybe paraphrase it like this. Is there not healing in the testimony of my faithfulness? Or you might hear Jeremiah saying it this way. Look, consider the heap. Has he ever been unfaithful? That's kind of what I'm saying to you now. Look, consider the heap. Well, I don't like that. Consider the heap. That's a little off track for the way we talk today. So as I said, in our modern terminology, we would say something more like the body of evidence, right? Well, let me say it to you this way. Jesus is the body of evidence, right? He is the evidence of Abba's love and concern and healing for all of humanity. He is the evidence in the body, right? The Word was made flesh. He is the evidence in the body. Jesus is the body of evidence. So when I say, look at the heap, has he ever been unfaithful? Now, you know, we've talked about our altar, our heap of testimony. Formerly a grocery store in Childress, Texas. Now a place where you can rent crackers and stuff. Parking lot's the same. Curb where we parked when Michelle was healed, same. We fly over it now instead of driving through it most of the time on our way to Dallas. When we pass through it, we always stop. We always give thanks. We always look back. So when I talk about is there no faithfulness in the testimony, I'm not talking about my testimony of what happened. I'm talking about the testimony of his faithfulness. Okay? He said, is there no healing in the testimony of my faithfulness? And you might look back and say, well, I haven't experienced a lot in my life to label the faithfulness of God in this area. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the faithfulness of the body of evidence. There is no body that is revealed to be more faithful than the body. He is the heap of the testimony of the faithfulness of God, right? So, why then is there no healing? Well, probably I should say, we're considering something other than the body of evidence, right? Could that be? Well, all right, why then no recovery? Or let's make it specific to, and let's go back to John now, but let's make it specific to our, why 38 years lying infirm? Well, let's go back and see if we can't begin to answer that a little bit for our good and for the good of those we love. All right? Going back to verse 6 again. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been in that condition a long time, he said to him, do you want to be made well? So here's something I want to, again, this has to apply to you and me or this message is wasted. Okay? Here's the thing we need to realize. Jesus has seen us all lying where we're lying, in the condition that we're lying there, for as long as we've been lying there in that condition. And he says, would you be made whole? Do you want to be made well? He doesn't say, like the faith preacher might say, why have you been laying there so long? He doesn't say, oh, ye of little faith. He just says, do you want to be made well? Do you want to just put these 38 years of the inability to produce results behind you? Okay? And then this was the second thing then. That was the first thing we've talked about. This is the second thing that really jumped out at me. And that was this stupid question that Jesus asked this man. Do you want to be made well? Of course, everybody wants to be made well. That was my presumption or assumption or whatever the word is. And then I went in the ministry. It seemed to me like a silly question. I mean, 38 years, laying by the poolside, can't fetch his own double bacon cheeseburger, got to wait on somebody else to wait on him hand and foot. I have no man to move me, to do this for me, to do that for me, to do anything for me. Here I lie. Okay, we'll get to that later. But anyway, so it seemed like a really silly question. And like I said, I just assumed, actually, it's the very reason Marilyn and I went into the ministry, because we'd seen such blessing in our own family with our children and so on and so forth, that we got excited about helping other people. And then I went into the ministry and found out that only some, of course, when I say I went into the ministry, our first contact of ministry would have been in the organized church. And so then I began to realize that only some of the professing believers really wanted to be made whole, really wanted to be made well, had any expectation of recovery. Okay? But that's why God himself asked, Why then is there no recovery for the health of the daughter of my people? See, some folks, maybe some of you, hopefully not, but some folks are paralyzed or frozen in their infirmity. Rejection, fear, some of the things we've talked about. And that's just so that we can all be in consideration of this message, while we don't all have some tangible, manifest physical infirmity, but we want to be all inclusive with our message. We don't want to exclude any from our message, okay? Would you be made whole is a message for everybody, not just a message for those whose bodies have manifested something that we can actually see, right? Okay. So, being made well isn't just the healing of the physical man, but I want you to understand that being made well will always result in a physical recovery. Let that sink in for a little bit for the doubters among us, right? Now, there are so many ways that people say, many ways, more than I could talk about in a day, but there are many ways that people say they don't want to be made whole. And this is where we're going to sting a little bit today. But like I said, we'll come back next week and try to kiss it and make it better. All right? But anyway, so I'm going to share just a few of these with you today. And you know, hopefully to create a favorable environment for eliciting a favorable response to the words of Jesus. Would you be made whole? That's really what I want to do. Are any of us as whole as we ought to be? No. Are any of us as well as God would have us be? No. He's hurt for the hurt of the daughter of his people, you know. And so, and again, I mean, I know I'm taking that scripture and that God had much more to say than just the physical ailments of his people. He was talking about the overall unwholeness, unhealthiness of Israel's entire life. I mean, I realize that. But I think that we have the freedom to extract personal application from larger pictures in the scripture. And just like we say the other way, this is not private, it's universal. We also want to understand what's universal is also personal. And we don't want to get caught up in the guys that are being cynical about the individual application of biblical truths, you know, and saying, oh, this is for the bigger scope, this is the world, this is for world peace. No, this is also for inner peace. It's for the wholeness of humanity coming together, Muslim and Buddhist and Christian, yes, but it's also for the coming together of your spirit and soul and body, preserved complete at the coming of the Lord, right? So we need to be able to go both directions with this without eliminating the other, without excluding the other. And that's one of the things I see in the deconstructionist movement of today. I see people deconstructing certain things, you know, from the personal application, because they haven't panned out in their life. So maybe if I can just get beyond myself, my vision can get out there somewhere, I can get my own personal attention off of me and my needs, and I can say, well, God is good to all men everywhere, but I'm alone in my infirmity. Yeah. Right? So we need to have, this is the only place where I like to use the word balance. I hate the word balance because it usually means something that's not really beneficial to us. But anyway, so anyway, as I said, you know, this isn't to condemn. I just want to try to, you know, create an environment for a favorable response from each of us to the words of the Lord, okay? So let's humble ourselves and let's try to receive the grace that comes with humility. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things, and these are all areas that I've witnessed as an individual, both attempting to be a pastor and also attempting to be made whole in myself. Okay, so these are things that are not just my testimony of the goofy people I've dealt with in the ministry. These are things that are testimony of the goofy pastor who was trying to become a whole man. Okay, so again, none of this is ever intended, nothing I say is ever intended to isolate any one individual or to lift me up above, because it really, believe me, these things all speak to me. A lot of them do, some of them don't, But so let's just talk about a few of these for a few minutes today, because like I said, this was the second thing, do you want to be made whole, that really jumped out at me. You know, some folks need, this is number one, not number one, but I mean, this is the first one we'll talk about. Some folks need the attention that their infirmity provides for them. Let that sink in for a minute. you know. Some folks need the supply that their infirmity provides for them. What do I mean by supply? I mean things like, well, let me say this first. Disability check, welfare check, okay? Now, I'm not against disability checks or welfare checks. I want you to make sure I understand that. I think they're a good thing. I think that whatever help people can get in the natural is good, and we ought to be a part of that. But what I'm saying is some people, some folks need the attention that their infirmity provides for them, because you see, with a lot of people, negative attention is better than positive attention. It's certainly better than no attention at all, I should say that. And sometimes it's better than positive attention because it's louder, right? It's louder, and it's something that can be manipulated out of people. Where positive attention just has to kind of come generally out of the kindness or the attentiveness of others. You know what I'm saying? But we can elicit negative attention from people, and attention is attention to some people. Now, I know we've got counselors here who are judging my every word right now, and that's okay. I've been at this a long time, and I'm just telling you things that I've observed in people that I've pastored. I don't claim to have these answers all down in stone by any means, but anyway. But, you know, these folks will often manipulate others and systems. Again, talking about things like welfare and so on and so forth. Again, they'll manipulate others and systems in order, consciously or subconsciously. Now, it's not always a conscious thing. It's not always I get up in the morning and think, how am I going to manipulate others to give me attention? It's just that I've become so accustomed to having you attend to me in the right sense. Now, again, there's people that need to be attended to. You understand what I'm saying? I don't want anybody to take this wrong. Remember, this is not under condemnation, and we all need attention in life, right? We all need attention, but anyway. And then some folks, you know, have become so secure. Now, listen to this carefully, because this may, I think this will speak to more of us than it probably should. But some folks have become so secure in the familiar that they'll actually manipulate their perception of a circumstance. In other words, where to some of us, their circumstance might appear to be a step in the right direction or a positive growth opportunity, they will manipulate their perception of it because they've become so familiar, so secure in the familiar, they will see it as a detriment to their progress. They will see that as, well, it's just going to fall through too because one did before. You hear what I'm saying? Now, the circumstance all the rest of us can see what a beautiful opportunity this is for them, and they will only see Eeyore. I don't know, Pooh. I just don't think we should go that way, Pooh. Right? Listen, if you knew how many Eeyores Marilyn and I have dealt with in 38 years in the ministry, wow. Anyway. They also, you know, will resist change, of course, and they generally will ascribe the responsibility for their issues to others in some way. Now, of course, the one we hear the most in the church oftentimes has been, well, my church didn't teach that, the church I grew up in. See what they're doing? You know, I've told some of you this before, but years ago, I remember it like it happened yesterday. I remember most of my life like it happened yesterday because I think it just did, didn't it? Man, just here we are today, and, you know, wow, it goes by so quickly. But I remember I was walking to my left across the stage of one of the first churches we pastored, and I made a statement, and I just said to the congregation, I said, the Presbyterian church didn't teach me that when I was growing up. And right as I was about to turn around, I heard the Spirit of God say, well, you had a Bible, you could have read it. You need to quit blaming the Presbyterian church for your lack of knowledge. Okay. So I came back and I said to the church, this is what the Lord just said to me. And I said, you know, obviously he's right because he's the Lord. All right, but I was going to blame somebody else for my lack of knowledge, right? For my whatever, right? And probably refer to that again in a moment too. But anyway, my church didn't. Or here's one. And again, boy, some of this stuff makes so much natural sense that I almost hesitate to say it because I don't want people to be offended by it. But how many times have I heard people say, well, it's a genetic predisposition in our family? My grandfather had a bad heart, my father had a bad heart, and my brother had a bad heart, and I have a bad heart, or something. Do you see how it's being focused on something else? I wonder if Jesus saw into the heart of this paralytic and heard the mumblings or the grumblings or just the considerations of his heart and was looking back, trying to put the blame somewhere else. If mother hadn't smoked while I was in the womb. Well, I mean, that's a modern day thing, If mother hadn't been a crackhead while I was in the womb. You see what I'm saying? I mean, there are applications to that, like I said, that are almost unavoidable because we realize that's the truth. I was molested as a child. My father, my brother, my uncle, my mother, my aunt molested me as a child, sexually abused me as a child. Again, that's a common, hate to use the word excuse because that sounds like I'm discounting it. I'm not, but I mean, it's a common response. And it's so prevalent in our society. There's so much of it out there. But yet, you see, does that keep a person? Does that keep a person from wholeness? No. It really doesn't, folks. Now, it may put them, it doesn't keep them from responding to what Jesus is asking, is what I'm saying. Sure, it's created a huge hole in their life. There was a huge hole of ignorance in my life because the Presbyterian Church didn't teach that, right? And now we've got a genetic predisposition, or we've got that, whatever, or what we're saying, though, is that all these things are greater than the desire and the abilities of my Heavenly Father. If you think about it. That's what we're saying when we say these things, right? Listen, I am totally empathetic and sympathetic with anybody who has been sexually abused, physically abused, verbally abused. I was a verbal abuser myself of my wife and my children. I am absolutely sympathetic with anybody that has felt the pain of any of those kinds of abuse. So I am never diminishing the hurt of those things. In a much lesser degree because I'm not capable as he is. I am hurt by the hurts of the people that I meet and have always been hurt. I hate to see suffering people in any dimension of suffering. Children, adults, the extremely elderly, it doesn't make any difference. I hate to see hurting people. So I'm never diminishing the hurt. I'm trying to create an atmosphere, an environment for you, those people, myself, to respond positively to would you be made whole. I don't physically weep, but I internally weep when I read some of the cynicisms of the intellectual writers of theology on Facebook who have turned their back on or who have come to just disparage or doubt the Father's love, the body of evidence, because it hasn't manifested in their life or in the life of one of their loved ones. That's not the way to go. That's not the way to go. You keep going. I'm just not a quitter with regard to this. All these years I've believed this. I've been sick a time or two. I've had a surgery or two. I've had emotional issues in my own life. I've had these things in my life, and I'm certainly far from finished yet. You can look forward to more emotional issues in my life, is what I'm saying. No, I'm not the finished product by any means. But I just will not become cynical. I will not become dismissive of the body of evidence. As my wife said a few weeks ago, he is faithful, 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 faithful. The next words out of my mouth, if I'm a word of faith preacher, are supposed to be, you are unfaithful, 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 unfaithful. No, that's not the way it works. He is faithful, and we are trying to launch, trying to connect, trying to encourage one another and ourselves to respond favorably to words that would not have been spoken were they not intended for every one of us to have a positive response to. Is there no balm in Gilead? And we are all to say, absolutely there is. Has it manifested in your life? Not necessarily yet. Shall I give up then? Hell no. Why would we give up? We've got one granddaughter. I mean, as wonderful as the health manifestation has been in our family, we've got one granddaughter that's a diabetic, sweetest girl in the world. She's at Texas A&M right now. And we're still believing God. We'll continue to believe God. And she's believing God too. And she'll continue to believe God. She's the daughter of our daughter who was healed. And we know God's faithful. She has a heap of testimony living right in her home when she's home from school. We don't give up. We don't quit. We don't become cynical. Well, I guess we were wrong all those years, Mayor. I guess we just were errant. Maybe we were just the lucky people. Maybe it was just coincidence. Well, like I said, I was an emotional wreck. Now I'm an emotional dented fender. But back then I was an emotional wreck. I was a totaled. And you weren't going to get your money back for the mess I'd made on the roadside, believe me. But anyway, no insurance company was covering me. Anyway, let's get on with these things. But then there's others, of course, we're all familiar with this, who develop belief systems to accommodate their infirmity. And I call these excuse doctrines. And there are huge ministries, generational curses. Generational curse is nothing but a BS. You apply whatever words you want to that. If you want to be holy, you stick with Bachelor of Science. If you want to go ahead and say it like it is, you go ahead and move on with that, okay? This is a huge excuse doctrine that is embraced by those who, want to accommodate their infirmity rather than responding, yes, I want to be made whole, let's get on with it, right? Demonic opposition, I hate that one. Well, the devil's just opposing us today. The devil doesn't want us online, so the devil knocked off the internet today. Oh, it's on now. Oh, well, welcome on the internet. Hope I haven't offended too many of you out there. But anyway, demonic, well, the devil's really fighting us, honey. No, the devil's not fighting it. I tell you, when we stopped giving any attention to the devil, I guess it's been almost 42 years ago now, 41 years ago, we never had another consideration of the devil after that. I just cannot do that. There was a time when I was drawn in by the charismatic thing, that the devil was still out there arm wrestling with Jesus, and once in a while he got the best of Jesus, especially with the left arm. Jesus was a right-armed carpenter. Sometimes his left arm wasn't maybe as strong, or something, I don't know. Every once in a while the devil prevailed, at least temporarily, and, we got our lunch ate and our bag popped, as some people would say, And then I began to say, this is just BS again. See? We began to say. And we just quit acknowledging the devil having any ability to do anything to anyone. Right. And as I've said, hear me tell you, if the devil could kill one person, he could have killed us all. That's right. If the devil could kill you, you'd have never been here anyway, because he would have killed your parents or your parents' parents or your parents' parents' parents before that. Right? There would be no humanity, no generations of anything if the devil could ever do anything. Because first of all, if it depends on doctrine, none of us have got it right yet. We've got to have a right doctrine in order to avoid the effects of the devil. Man, I'll tell you, I don't like a lot of those southern terms, but one Kenneth Hagin said I like was ignorance gone to seed. And boy, I'll tell you, that was a good one, right? Well, God doesn't always heal, or this one here is another one that I know we've all heard somewhere along. Well, God is using my infirmity to teach others that they can live a meaningful life with this infirmity. Now listen, yes, people can live meaningful lives in the midst of their infirmities, useful lives, quality lives. I'm not disputing any of that. Please don't take my examples and turn them over and say the wrong thing from them. I'm not against welfare. I'm not against disability checks. I'm not against attention. I'm not against any of those things. I'm talking about these things when they are manifest in those who don't realize they're saying, I don't want to be made whole. I don't want to be healed. I'd rather believe my stinky doctrine. I'd rather believe that God is using my infirmity. God's not using your infirmity. And then, of course, there's those folks who just, lack knowledge or alternatives. I've already referred to this one, but whose fault would that be if you really think about it? Those who lack knowledge, generally their temporal lives are so busy and so full of themselves, and this was me, that they have no time, for taking Jesus seriously. Jesus can be a Sunday go-to-meeting Jesus, but they have no time for taking Jesus seriously. And he just doesn't fit into their busy lives. And then, of course, their lives are made busier by the fact that they have even more problems that are unresolved because they're not taking Jesus seriously. See how that kind of snowballs on you? But Jesus keeps asking all of these, do you want to be made well? Would you be made whole? He keeps asking. He's been asking now down through the ages. I'm sure he was asking before he bumped into this dude at Bethesda, but John wrote it down for us, so I know from the time of Bethesda until today, Jesus is still saying, do you want to be made well? Would you be made whole? Are you ready to come out from behind the things that you're hiding behind and allow me to make you whole? And yes, it will manifest in your physical being. It'll manifest in your relationships with others. Listen, my relationship with my wife is far from perfect, but I'll tell you what, I used to be so verbally abusive, and until I was willing to come out from behind that, I had no future before me. And I knew it daily. I was a miserable individual inside because I knew that this woman I loved with all my heart, still do today, and these children that were so precious to me were being ruined every day in their life by me and my mouth. And then I began to hear Jesus. Would you be made whole? You want to be well, son? You want to be beyond this? See? So it affects your relationships with others. It affects your physical health. It affects everything you do in life. To be able to respond positively to this and not say, well, I don't believe that way. Yeah, but if I do that, then my husband or my wife or my kids or somebody won't have to care for me night and day. And I'm not making reference to people in a situation like Susan's in. I don't mean that at all. We've known some people who just really this was what their life was all about, was manipulating others to do for them. Not needing others to do for them, but manipulating others to do for them. You know the difference? Yes. Yep. I don't manipulate Marilyn to cook for me. I need her to cook for me. Some of you saw how poorly I looked while she was gone these last 2 times. And you knew there was a need in my life that was going unfulfilled. Joyce didn't invite me up for dinner. I would have willfully gone up. No. And then there, of course, there's still those others who, have the knowledge, and this is really prevalent, and this is probably the thing that's going to hit most of us the closest to home, have the knowledge but refuse to practice in the face of adversity. Yep. Now, if you haven't been there, there's nobody who hasn't been there. I'm there. I go there from time to time. Sometimes I go to visit. Sometimes I go and I start to move my luggage in. That place of having the knowledge but not being willing to practice in the face of adversity. I back up to the door with my truck, start unloading my stuff, and if my wife doesn't call me a weenie and call me off, something generally happens. I usually finally come to my senses. I come to myself and say, my Father, like the prodigal did. So we've all been there. We all want to go there. And sometimes we stay there a little bit longer than we should. Not just a vacation, it becomes a temporary residence or something. But here's my final example for today. There's a million examples, and all of you probably have got more of them that you're familiar with, maybe some things that you practice regularly yourself. If you let me in on them, I could use them in my next message. I won't point you out to the people. But, in matters of emotional instability, and there are some emotionally unstable, and you know what I mean, is, clinically emotionally unstable, and so on and so forth, Personality dysfunctions, things like this, and severe behavioral disorders and failures, and things that the church would just slap under the heading of sin, In the case of those kind of things, a lot of Christians, and again, I'm just referring to Christians right now because we know how the world is, but, they remain bedridden at poolside for fear of being exposed, right? Or rejected because of their malady, whatever it is, exposed or being reproached or experiencing a devalued status in the church or among the Christians. And you see, the interesting thing about it is that Jesus offers none of those things. Jesus doesn't offer any exposure. Oh, the Holy Ghost is going to expose you. No, he's not. That's a lie. The only way I'm ever going to be exposed for my failure is if you discover it and you decide to expose it. Because Father's not in that business. Jesus is not in that business. I'm never going to be rejected. I'm never going to be, reproached. Hey, any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who giveth to all men freely and without reproach. There's no reproach ever, right? There's never a devalued status. Now, listen to me carefully. Don't think I'm approving anything. Not for the prostitute visiting pastor, not for the pastor who has come out and been shown to be homosexual and loses his huge church. There's never a devalued status in the presence of Papa. There's never reproach. There's never, again, exposure didn't come from God. Doesn't it come from God on those things, right? There's never any rejection. But you see, so many people are miserable in their situation for fear of these things, and oftentimes reject offers of ministry. Marilyn and I have had so many people leave the fellowship over the years, going way back, people who we really had made ourselves available to help them in these kind of things. Guys caught up in deep in pornography and stuff, and one friend of ours got caught stealing some pornographic videos or something in a store in the mall years ago. And the man had the problem for years. He was a good man, good father, loved his kids, loved his wife, just caught up in something, but could not go and get help. And the one time he did try to get help from a local pastor whose name you'd know if I told you, I won't tell you. When he told the man what his problem was, the pastor just closed his Bible and said, "This conversation's over." That's not what he would see. So he got exactly what he had come to expect anyway. Rejection, reproach, and he got what he expected. And so many people get in these areas. So here's the thing. Do you want to be made whole? And listen, I don't want to hear any of your confessions of sin. That's not what I'm talking about. This is between you and the guy talking at the pool, right? But do you want to be made whole more than you want to remain inwardly tortured and tormented by that which you know is destroying you from the inside out? Because number one, you live in fear that your wife is going to find out, or you live in fear that you know what I'm saying? You live in fear that the people around you who respect you in the church are going to reject you. A lot of pastors have fallen into areas where they just collapsed basically under the pressure. I don't mean collapsed physically, but collapsed under the pressure of having a secret sin, which is not like a secret Santa, okay? A secret sin which just was destroying them from the inside out. Okay? And yet what they should be able to do is to say, I mean, not necessarily announce it publicly, because there's people out there but they should be able to get help. I was blessed. I had a couple of good friends who came to me, said, Mike, we love you. We've always loved you and Marilyn and your family. But one of my best friends said, I can't continue to bring my family here to the church on Sundays knowing that you are afraid to deal with this issue in you. The other one didn't say, I can't continue to bring my family, but he said, Mike, we recognize this issue in you. You've got to deal with it. See? Thank God for friends like that. Friends. Now, there were others who would have come to me and said, man, you call yourself a man of God? And you've got this issue? You go home and you verbally abuse Marilyn, and we hear you verbally abuse your kids sometimes. You'll go home and do that and come back and stand in the pulpit and preach on Sunday. See, that's what I was afraid of. But when Dan and Ed came to me, it was totally different. So we ought to be able to get there. We ought to be able to talk about those things, right? Do you want to be made whole more than you want to continue to hide and suffer? I don't know if you get anything out of this, but I'm glad I'm preaching it again. As I said, and these folks, like I said, are commonly offended by offers of. We've had people leave here who have gone on to, and again, sometimes people say this, well, you leave my church, you're going to die. I don't mean that. We've had people leave that we've tried to help who have gone on to total destruction in their lives. Physical destruction, marital destruction. Well, we've had a couple of them that have been involved in death situations, people that were in our church that we wanted to try and help them. And we said, listen, there's no condemnation here. We've all done it. We've all been there. If we haven't done it ourselves, our children have done it. If our children haven't done it, we've been, I'm saying. But these people often, the ones that don't want to be made whole are often separate themselves from any person or group that might offer them wellness. As I said, none of this is to condemn. It's only to bless you because, the being made whole begins with welcoming, Jesus into these situations, right? Now, it's important for us as I start to wrap this up here, it's important to understand the Lord's question. So let me tell you what it wasn't. Remember what the Lord's question is? Do you want to be made well, right? Would you be made whole? Now, this is what the Lord's question wasn't. I'm going to give you two examples of what the Lord's question wasn't. I'm stressing that because we all want it to be what it wasn't. He didn't say, would you be free of difficulty and undesirable circumstances? Damn right. No, it's not what he said, right? Because that's never going to happen. In this world, you will have tribulation. All who desire to live godlike or godly in Christ Jesus will experience persecution of some nature. So that wasn't his question. Would you like to be free of all difficulty and undesirable circumstances? Well, yeah, duh. Say, yeah, I would, of course. Well, that's not the question, right? And neither was the question, and you'll all like this one, because this is one that I have hoped he would ask me for years. Would you like to be free of all the annoying people around you? No, he didn't ask that either. Right? But see, here's the thing. We're so accustomed to pointing to our circumstances or to other people. Isn't that right? But Jesus didn't ask about these things. The question was, would you be made whole? Right? Would you be made whole? And Jesus wasn't pointing his finger at the man at Bethesda and saying, what's the matter with you? Because the origin, the root, the cause was irrelevant to Jesus. I want to say that again. The origin or the cause or the root of what was the matter with this man was irrelevant to Jesus. It's irrelevant to Jesus what the root of your problem is, or what the cause of your problem is. And when I say it's irrelevant to the woman who has been raped by her father or whatever, I don't mean that his heart is irrelevant to your heart. or that your hurt is irrelevant to him. I mean, the cause is irrelevant to the question. Would you be made whole? But would you be made whole? But you don't, would you be made well? See, that's all Jesus is asking. He doesn't go on witch hunts. He doesn't even want to entertain that kind of a conversation. He's bigger and better than all that. He's much kinder than humanity around you. He doesn't need that. All right? All right, the last thing is, and this will just take a second, and we'll talk about it maybe more next week. Verse 7. This is the third thing that jumped out at me. The sick man answered him, Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, but while I am coming, another steps down before me. The sick man answered him, Sir, I have no man. I'm thoroughly convinced that one of the biggest problems in the charismatic church is looking mostly to men. Right? If Pastor Mike would just preach the perfect message on healing, if this televangelist or that healing specialist or this miracle worker would just come around and help me get into the pool of God's wholeness. That wasn't the question, right? In other words, I haven't been healed because I have no man to put me into the pool of God's wholeness. But again, Jesus didn't say, do you want a man to assist you into wholeness? Is this what you need as a man? Do you need 40 weeks of any kind of teaching from Mike on anything to be whole? Not 40. Or 39, or 21, or even 1. See, but I'm sure that I just realized how much of several years ago I did, what a problem this is. So the only question he asked was, do you want to be made well? Now, I've administered all the sting that I want to administer. Next week, we'll go on a little bit further, and we'll see if we can help all of us be able to respond and stand in that response consistently. Do you want to be made whole? Did you get anything out of that? Okay, good. Praise God. Now, as I said, as I posted on Facebook, really what we're going to do is these few weeks, I want to just talk a little bit about the foundations of persuasion and expectation that have kept Marilyn and me, Larry, thank you. I put Marilyn and I, and Larry was generous enough to correct me so I could correct it. But anyway, that have really kept us going forward in the face of life's tribulations. A lot of times people think, well, he talks this way because he hasn't had a lot of tribulation. Well, yeah, we've had our share of tribulation, and we've been very blessed not to have had to deal with some of the things that other people have dealt with. And we're very empathetic and sympathetic and brokenhearted for people when they are experiencing severe things like this. But basically, that's what I want to do. I want to encourage you. Most of you have read your Bible enough to know and we'll continue like this, like we're doing now. But most of you have read your Bible enough to know, and you're in this environment because you know God is a healer, Jesus is a healer. And so what we want to do is just be able to encourage you lest you become a cynic, lest you lose hope. So anyway, Father, thank